I'm Poonam Bafna, Ehsaas Woman of Coimbatore, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here today for an exceptional book unveiling event, Kitaab, a book launch event organized by Prabha Khaitan Foundation. It's an association with the Ehsaas Women of India and the prestigious India Habitat Center. I thank the entire team of India Habitat Center for their meticulous support in this event. Today's impeccably curated gathering is to honor the latest literary masterpiece by Dr. Vikram Sampath. Meticulously researched, authoritative, and unputdownable, Dr. Vikram Sampath's book, Tipu Sultan, the Saga of Mysore's Interregnum, opens a window to a life and times of one of the most debated figures from India's history. It's an absolute honor to have amongst us today's chief guest, Honourable Minister of External Affairs, Dr. S. Jaishankar, Chair of the session, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, a special guest, Shri Pavan K. Varma. Is he here? Yeah, okay. May we have a round of applause for the dignitaries, please. May I now invite Ms. Vinnie Kakkar, National Advisor of Prabha Khaitan Foundation, to say a few words about the foundation.
Good evening, and a warm welcome to everyone present here. Before we proceed into the evening's curated agenda, please allow me to acquaint you with the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. The Prabha Khaitan Foundation, PKF, is a non-profitable trust committed to humanitarian and socio-cultural causes. Late, Dr. Prabha Khaitan established it as a charitable trust in the early 1980s. Based in Kolkata, it is committed to supporting women's empowerment, gender equality, literature, culture, and performing arts. Late Dr. Prabha Khaitan was an eminent Indian literator, philanthropist, social worker, entrepreneur, and feminist who established the foundation and believed in unity in diversity. The foundation's multifaceted initiatives include the Right Circle, Kalam, Aakhar, Kitaab, and Author's Afternoon, Loves, Shabd, Ek Mulakat, Tete Tea, The Universe Writes, Chaupal, Rahat, Karuna, Muskan, and boutique festivals like Sheharnama and Ramayan Kala Utsav. These fall under the diverse verticals of literature and language, culture and heritage, social welfare and women empowerment. Of the literary initiatives, Kitaab occupies a unique significance to us, making the emergence of each book and offering authors a stage to present their latest literary works to an insightful and discerning audience. The anthem of Prabha Khaitan Foundation deserves a special mention. It is ensured by the national philosophy, unity in diversity. The anthem of Prabha Khaitan Foundation has been curated by musical genius Pandit Vishwa Mohan Bhattji. The anthem reflects the true essence of the multicultural diversity of India. I now request Poonam Bafna ji to take us further with the proceedings for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vinnie Kakkar. And I deem it my privilege to introduce today's chief guest, Honourable Minister of External Affairs, Dr. S. Jaishankar. While his remarkable accomplishments truly require no introduction, allow me the privilege of briefly highlighting his exceptional contributions. Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar is India's External Affairs Minister since 2019. He is a member of the Rajya Sabha from the state of Gujarat. He was Foreign Secretary from 2015 to 2018 and served as Ambassador to the United States, China, and Czech Republic, and as a High Commissioner to Singapore for the period 2007 to 2009. He has also served in other diplomatic assignments in embassies in Moscow, Colombo, Budapest, and Tokyo, as well in the Ministry of External Affairs and the President's Secretariat. He was also the President, Global Corporate Affairs at Tata Sons Private Limited from May 2018. Dr. Jaishankar is a graduate of St. Stephen's College at the University of Delhi. He has a Master's in Political Science and an MPhil and PhD in International Relations from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He is a recipient of the Padma Shri Award in 2019 and has written widely acclaimed best-selling books, The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World, and Why Bharat Matters. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Can we have a huge round of applause? The chair for today's session will be Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee. Ambassador Mukherjee is a postgraduate first class in history from Delhi University and has a degree superior in French history and civilization from Sorbonne University, France. Ms. Mukherjee joined the Indian Foreign Services in 1976 and was India's ambassador to UNESCO, Paris from 2004 to 2010, and subsequently India's ambassador to the Netherlands, The Hague from 2010 to 2013. She was elected the first woman president of India Habitat Center in 2023. Calls for a huge round of applause. A prolific writer, she has authored 4 books. She's also published over 100 articles, columns, reports, and monographs in leading national and international publications. A natural orator, Ms. Mukherjee is a political commentator on TV and on Indian culture and civilization, the India-EU relationship, Brexit, India's interests in the Indo-Pacific, the chemical weapons regime, nuclear issues, and the changing contours of India's foreign policy, apart from security issues of concern to India. A very warm welcome to you, madam. Our special guest today, Shri Pavanji Varma. He is a writer, diplomat, and now in politics, where he was a member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha and earlier advisor to the Chief Minister of Bihar with the rank of cabinet minister. He is the author of over a dozen best-selling books. He has been India's ambassador to several countries, including Bhutan, director of the Nehru Center in London, official spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs, Director General, ICCR, and Press Secretary to the President of India. Mr. Varma was conferred an honorary doctoral degree for his contributions to the fields of diplomacy, literature, culture, and aesthetics by the University of Indianapolis in 2005. In 2018, he has also been conferred an honorary doctorate by Sri Sharda Institute of Indian Management for his book Adi Shankaracharya, Hinduism's Greatest Thinker. In 2012, Mr. Pavan Varma was conferred Bhutan's highest civilian award, the Druk Taksey, by His Majesty, the King of Bhutan. A warm welcome to you, Pavanji. Now, for the star of this evening, Dr. Vikram Sampath. Bangalore-based historian, Dr. Vikram Sampath is the author of 10 acclaimed books on Indian history. His 2-volume biography on Veer Savarkar and his latest books, Brave Hearts of Bharat and Waiting for Shiva, Unearthing the Truth of Kashi's Gyanvapi, has all gone on to become national bestsellers. His latest book, Tipu Sultan, the Saga of Mysore's Interregnum, period 1760 to 1799, which is being launched today, has been creating waves even before its launch and went on for 2 reprints even before the books officially hit the stands. Can we have an applause for him? In 2021, Vikram was elected a fellow of the prestigious Royal Historical Society. He was awarded the Sahitya Akademi's first Yuva Puraskar in English Literature and the ARSC's International Award for Excellence in Historical Research in New York for his book, My Name is Gauhar Jan, The Life and Times of a Musician. The book has even been adapted for a play, Gauhar, by Lilith Dubey. He was among the 4 writers and artists selected as writers in residence at the Rashtrapati Bhavan in 2015. Vikram has a doctorate in history and music from the University of Queensland, Australia, and was a senior research fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi, for the period 2017 to 2019. He was also a fellow of the Aspen Global Leadership Network, Eisenhower Global Fellow, and a visiting fellow of the Viscount Club, Berlin. Currently, he is an adjunct senior fellow at Monash University, Australia. He is the founder of the Archive of Indian Music and the Foundation for Indian Historical and Cultural Research that fosters new scholarships in Indian history and curates Earth, a Culture Fest. Heartiest welcome to you, Dr. Sampath. May I now invite and request Ms. Vinnie Kakkar, National Advisor of Prabha Khaitan Foundation, to felicitate dignitaries with special handlooms from South India, the Ponare. Prabha Khaitan Foundation advocates promoting cross-state cultural appreciation with each culture that adds to the nation's unique character. May I now request Dr. Vikram Sampath to gift his previous books to the Honourable Minister. Now, for the moment we all have been waiting for, is here, the book launch ceremony of Tipu Sultan, the Saga of Mysore's Interregnum, authored by Dr. Vikram Sampath. To join us, I invite Anindita Chatterjee, Executive Trustee, Prabha Khaitan Foundation, and my fellow Ehsaas women, Dipali Bhasin, Shazia Ilmi, and Guruji Sakshi Shri of the Siddha Sudarshan Dham, conversationalist Ms. Lipika Bhushan, to come up on the stage. It's our utmost privilege and request, may I request the Chief Guest, Honourable Minister of External Affairs, Dr. Jaishankar ji, to share a few words with us.
All my distinguished friends on the dais, including the author, dear friends, I'm really very, very pleased to join you all today at the launch of Dr. Vikram Sampath's book, Tipu Sultan, the Saga of Mysore's Interregnum, 1761 to 1799. Let me begin by conveying my felicitations to the author for yet another significant contribution to a better understanding of our past. Indeed, to the publishers, Penguin Vintage, to the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, and of course to the India Habitat Center, without which this evening would not be possible. About this book. To call this a biography would be a serious understatement, because it is something very much more, capturing not just the flavor of a fast-moving and a complicated era, but offering insights into politics, strategy, administration, sociology, and even diplomacy. It is both granular in its detail and creative in many ways in its spirit, making the reader a fly in the wall in Tipu Sultan's palace. There is an honesty as well as an objectivity, I think, in Vikram's approach. And I suppose in this case, that would not have been entirely easy. In fact, if you ever have an American edition to this book, I would suggest the subtitle, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Tipu Sultan But Were Afraid to Ask. Now, Tipu Sultan, by any standards, is actually a very, very complex figure in our history. On the one hand, he has the reputation as a key figure who resisted the imposition of British colonial control over India. And it is a fact that his defeat and death can be considered a turning point when it came to the fate of peninsular India. At the same time, he evokes strong adverse sentiments even today in many regions, by some in Mysore itself, in Coorg, and in Malabar. Contemporary history writing, certainly at the national level, has focused largely on the former aspect, underplaying, if not neglecting, the latter. And let's be honest, this was not an accident. Now, history in all societies is complicated, and the politics of the day often indulges in cherry-picking facts. To a considerable extent, that has happened in the case of Tipu Sultan. By highlighting the Tipu English binary to the exclusion of a more complicated reality, a particular narrative has been advanced over the years. Dr. S.L. Bhairappa's foreword, which all of you would read when you read the book, I think is a very blunt reminder of that particular debate. This book, therefore, has a very special value, because what it does is it not only presents facts about Tipu Sultan for the reader to make his or her own judgment, but it also, and to my mind this is very important, it also brings out the context in all its intricacy. In that process, I can see that Vikram would have had many challenges of orthodoxy to overcome. And these, by the way, I must say, are not specific to the treatment of Tipu Sultan. How much of our past has been airbrushed, how awkward issues have been glossed over, how facts are tailored for regime convenience. These are actually basic questions which confront us all today. As a product myself of an institution that was at the center of these politically driven endeavors, I can well appreciate the need to present an accurate representation of history. In the last decade, the changes in our political dispensation has encouraged the emergence of alternative perspectives and balanced accounts. We are no longer prisoners of a vote bank, nor is it politically incorrect to bring out inconvenient truths. Obviously, there are many more subjects on which the same degree of objectivity is needed. So how exactly we historically characterize Tipu Sultan? That is the conundrum that this work addresses. Now, there can be no doubt that Tipu was fiercely and almost consistently anti-British. How much of it was inherent, how much a result of their allying with his local rivals, that I think is very difficult to distinguish. To counter British ambitions, Tipu Sultan had no hesitation in collaboration with the French. That actually makes a straightforward anti-foreign narrative very difficult to assert. At various points, he also reached out to the rulers of Turkey, of Afghanistan, and of Persia for faith-based support. Perhaps the truth is that the sense of nationhood that all of us have now was simply not there then. When identities and awareness are so different at that time, force-fitting them into a contemporary construct seems more than a little challengeable. It could well be asked whether Tipu was anti-foreigner per se, or confronting those who were an impediment to his aggrandizement. Now, more touchy are a set of related issues pertaining to Tipu's own treatment of his own people and those of neighboring kingdoms. As the author has vividly brought out, Mysoreans themselves, the Kodavas, and those in Malabar and those in Travancore, they still carry deep scars from their experiences of Tipu's rule. If the Mandyam Iyengars observe Deepavali as a day of mourning, there is good reason to do so. There are Tipu's own writings, communications, and of course actions that attest to his mindset. Indeed, even his diplomatic activities reflected his faith and identity in strongest terms. The author, in my view, has been sensible in opening them up all to daylight. After all, nothing is more revealing than the self-description of rulers, the nature of their orders, and the content of their own conversations. Undoubtedly, there will also be policies, incidents, and events of a contradictory nature. At the end of the day, this larger assessment of Tipu's character has to get that balance right. As someone from the diplomatic world, I was really struck, and I'm most grateful to you for that, by information and insights which were provided in this volume about Tipu's foreign policy. We in India have tended to mainly study post-independent foreign policy. Who knows, perhaps this too was a conscious choice. But the fact is that many of our kingdoms and our states forayed into international affairs in previous centuries in pursuance of their particular interests. And some, by the way, continue to do so even till independence. The interactions of Tipu's emissaries with their French and Turkish counterparts is really fascinating. I don't want to tell my two diplomatic colleagues who are on the stage what happened to his emissaries when they did not succeed. They will discover it, and I think, Ambassador, you should take note too. But Tipu's expectations of his foreign partners and the incentives that he actually offers them, it actually tells us something about his mindset. There are, by the way, lessons as well about the importance of accurately understanding global developments. On crucial occasions, Tipu was actually caught on the wrong side of events in France. And I must say this, Vikram, I did not know till I read the book that Napoleon actually wrote to Tipu Sultan. It's a different matter that he never got those letters. Ironically, the British, as is their habit, stole many things. Ironically, Tipu's own fate was decided largely by diplomacy, since the British created such an all-encompassing coalition. That he was left so friendless at the end should itself be a cause for introspection. So I now leave it to the author and to the distinguished panelists to offer their views. But let me just conclude by saying this, that the importance of open-minded scholarship and a genuine debate are central to our evolution as a pluralistic society and a vibrant democracy. I thank you all for your attention.
You have to get up anyway. Thank you, Honourable Minister, Dr. Jaishankar ji, for your encouraging and assertive words. I now invite the conversationalist, Ms. Lipika Bhushan, on the dais. Lipika is an award-winning senior publishing professional. She's the founder of Market My Book. She's headed marketing at HarperCollins India for about 7 years before testing her entrepreneurial skills. She consults with publishing brands such as Penguin India, Pan Macmillan, Simon, and others, are among the others. She's a graduate from Bajaj and IIM Ahmedabad alumnus. Lipika's interviews, bylines, and poetry appear frequently in leading newspapers. May I request Ms. Dipali Bhasin to come and felicitate Ms. Lipika Bhushan. I now request Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, chair of today's session, to present her opening remarks and set the stage for today's much-awaited panel discussion.
Thank you very much. Dear External Affairs Minister, my dear friend from Foreign Service days, my batchmate Ambassador Pavan Varma, the most famous Vikram Sampath, my colleagues from the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, my colleagues from Habitat, and this amazing audience here, the German ambassador, who's actually sitting in the third row when we had a seat for him in the first row. And you can still come in front. Welcome all of you to this very scintillating first collaboration we, Habitat Center, have had with the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. I actually have read the entire book, Vikram, so it was quite a challenging experience. But then, like my friend, the External Affairs Minister, we have this annoying habit of actually reading the entire book from cover to cover when we come before a book launch with such an eclectic audience. I'd like to first begin by saying, as a student of history, that the 18th century in India was one of its darkest phases. It marked its decline from prosperity to conflict and impoverishment. And Vikram's book is an example of how narrative history should be written and how it was not written in the past. The contrived romanticism of the past has been set aside, and the reader, and this is a North Indian audience, is brought face to face with the actual horrors that overwhelmed southern India. And many people in the north don't know the history of the south, the history of the East and the history of the West. So thank you very much for enlightening all of us here in North India. The challenge that Vikram Sampath, a Bengaluru-based historian, accepted was to demystify Tipu Sultan and to present him as he was, warts and all. The dilemma before a historian is to resolve the contradiction between an Indian resistance hero, as he was to Marxist historians, including my teacher, Dr. Irfan Habib, who also must have been EM's teacher, because we belong to the same generation of Marxist historians who taught us history, and to the widely reviled murderer of hundreds of thousands of Hindus and Christians. How then should a historian judge Tipu Sultan? Ultimately, to go back to E.H. Carr, because that's the generation which studied history by first looking at E.H. Carr, what is history? E.H. Carr said, history is a continuous fact of interaction between the historian and his facts, an unending dialogue between the present and the past, a dynamic dialectical process which cannot be limited by mere empiricism and love of facts alone. That is exactly what Vikram has done in demystifying Tipu Sultan. Because when you look at him through this book, which you will all read from cover to cover as I have, I hope, Tipu appears to be a bundle of contradictions. And it is difficult sometimes to understand how to judge him. Exactly the way EM said, that how anti-Brit was he? How anti-colonial was he? How communal was he? And how much sense did he have of a nation state? If you come to think of it, if you compare him with, let's say, the contemporary period from my home state, Bengal, the eastern part of India, there was already a perspective of a nation state. But clearly, Tipu had not understood that when he went about trying to dislodge the British with the help of the French. And why is Tipu being still discussed today? The reason for that is very simple. When we learned history in our generation, we learned history either through the colonial narrative of the British who had just left, or through the Marxist narrative of historians who were extremely good, very left-wing, and who had a considered view of Indian history very, very different from what perhaps was the reality. So in that case, I ask all of you to judge after reading the book, was Tipu a zealot, a patriot, or both? And what exactly did it mean to be a patriot in Tipu's time and age? And why has Vikram called him a sultan? That's also very interesting, which I'm sure he will answer. Don't forget that Tipu's ascent to power was also accidental. And he was very, very different from his father, Hyder Ali. And his career also took a completely different path. Finally, I'd like to say that unlike his father, Tipu got his kingdom on a platter. It was all there for him. But in a diabolical war thirst, he launched lethal attacks on Malabar, Mangalore, Travancore, and Coorg, and left behind a trail of death, destruction, mass conversions, and desecration of religious places of worship, which people in those areas have never forgotten, and which people in other parts of India, particularly North India, are just beginning to discover. Hello, time to smell the coffee and to understand what our history was. Finally, I'd like to say that I would say that Tipu Sultan is one of the most debated figures in India's history. Recently, we had a book launch here of another Foreign Service writer. In fact, I was telling EM that our gatherings are becoming increasingly incestuous, if I may say so. But since we have so many Foreign Service authors and presenting their books, this particular book by Rajiv Dogra on autocrats, where he did not include Tipu Sultan, and I will tell him that when I go home. Actually, Rajiv Dogra's definition of what is an autocrat, a dictator, if you look at it closely, would fit in with some of the facts about Tipu Sultan that Vikram has brought out in his amazing narrative. So I would finally say that ultimately, when you look at Tipu and his so-called legacy, and I question, does he have a legacy? It will be interpreted, as E.H. Carr said, as the historian sees the fact, it will be interpreted as the historian understands the facts. And that is what we also learned in Delhi University. I didn't go to JNU like EM. And there I was taught political thought by a Marxist scientist who was amazing and who said, Hegel said, the owl of Minerva takes its flight only when the shadows of evening have fallen. When I asked him, what does it mean? He said, it means history will be written later and interpreted later as the historian sees it. So in that case, I would say a German was before E.H. Carr, to the German ambassador. Thank you all, and congratulations, Vikram, for your book.
Thank you, ma'am. May I now request Lipika Bhushan to take the session forward.
Namaskar, good evening, everybody. I've had the privilege of knowing Vikram for several years now. And one book after another, he's been resurrecting these forgotten personalities. And one book after another, they've been massive bestsellers. One book after another, we see a packed hall of audiences, and it's amazing to see that, and very encouraging indeed to see a large number of you know, in the young bracket, so to say. What are you trying to do, Vikram? I mean, it's been 2 decades of one bestseller after another.
Thank you. A very good evening, everyone. I find myself completely unequal to the task of speaking this evening when I'm flanked by the incestuous club members on my left, on my right, and on the front of me. And I'm actually trying to speak after a person who's probably more popular among the young than me. Almost all the Instagram memes would have him with those laser eyes and some... And suddenly from nowhere there's an imaginary hat that comes in and he's the rock star. So I'm sure a lot of things you said today, sir, will also make their way to the Instagram memes. And that's how Gen Alpha, is it? That is the latest generation consumes this material. I'm glad at least that will give them a segue to read this 900-page book otherwise. So thank you very much, Dr. Jaishankar, for taking time amidst what I know is a grueling schedule, traversing across countries, and I know that gave you an opportunity to go through this book over several flights, as you mentioned to me. He even knew that I had acknowledged my Guru, Sakshi Shri Maharaj, in the acknowledgements. When I tried to introduce them, he said, yes, I know him, I've read about him. So thank you so much, sir. And thank you, Bhaswati ji, for such a brilliant, opening remarks. I think you summed up the entire predicament that we as historians face today. And Ambassador Pavan Varma ji, who's been a very dear friend. We've been on several television debates, usually on the opposite sides of the spectrum. But still, Pavan ji is always very warm, and we leave and there's no rancor and bitterness even on stage with an intellectual like him. It's always intellectual differences which you can always have, and then shake hands and give a hug to each other.
Do we have any?
I think we should rewind some of the debates. If you have changed your views, I'm very happy. Because I haven't. Yes. And a deep thanks to Prabha Khaitan Foundation, which has always stood by me and supported all my endeavors, to the Habitat Center and this wonderful audience. I'm so sorry that the room fell short for many of you. Some of you could come in the front and actually seat yourself. It looks bad to see so many of you standing. So what was your question? How do I do it? I went into the vote of thanks before starting the opening remarks. But on a serious note, when I have such eminences in front and left and right of me, people who ask about what is the legacy of Tipu Sultan, whether he had a legacy at all, as Ambassador Mukherjee mentioned, I take you back to September 8th, 1965, when the Pakistan Navy actually got 4 naval ships, the PNS, on their Operation Dwarka, which was renamed as Operation Somnath, very reminiscent of what happened 1,000 years ago, the repeated destruction of Somnath. And the 5 Pakistan naval ships, PNSs, were named PNS Babar, PNS Shah Jahan, PNS Jahangir, PNS Alamgir after Aurangzeb. The 5th ship was interesting. It was called PNS Tipu Sultan. Now the first 4 I can still understand that it formed part of the rule geographically of the Mughal Empire, and Pakistan after 1947 also belonged to that. But why on earth would our Western neighbor actually choose to name a ship after a distant South Indian ruler, Kannada speaking province of Mysore? And therein lies the answer as to what the legacy of Tipu Sultan is today. And just about 5 years ago, I think you had the then Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, in the parliament actually talking about Tipu being his inspiration. And that he would actually try to emulate Tipu's life. I hope he knew the whole history as to how Tipu met his end eventually on the 4th of May 1799 amidst a heap of dead bodies, literally people trying to clear the way to find his dead body. I really hope.
We'll send him a copy by diplomatic bag.
So I don't know if it was a Freudian slip on his part, but nonetheless, I think a country which otherwise airbrushes, forgets a large part of its history and considers the Arab invasion of Sindh of 712 as the starting point of its nationhood, for them to actually remember this man with whom they had no connection whatsoever, no commonalities of language or rule other than the faith, I think that says a lot about him. And that is why, they learnt their history well, but I think a lot of Indians, brainwashed into not learning their true history, still venerate, the person whose actual affiliation and respect comes from across the border. I'm not saying that those who venerate him are anti-national and so on. I don't want to get into that trap at all. But I think the larger theological reasons for which, he is respected today, I think that is what brings his relevance back. And as Ambassador Mukherjee said, it is that constant dialectic between the historian and his facts, which is what this book tries to reattempt. And in a very perverse way, I must say that my entire foray into writing, into historiography was thanks to Tipu Sultan. I must have been a boy of about 12 or 13 years of age when I must make a serious confession that I hated history in school. And almost all the time I used to be seen like some of those people there, outside class, kneeling down. And the maximum punishments I got was also for history. And at that time, if some of you, the older generation here would remember, there was this very popular serial in the only channel that we all saw and had, Doordarshan, The Sword of Tipu Sultan, produced by Sanjay Khan, in which he played the lead role. And if you remember, to show Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan in a very exalted manner, the Wadiyar rulers, the Hindu Maharaja and the royal family, from whom these people usurped the throne, and hence the subtitle Interregnum. I assure you it has nothing got to do with the person who has given the endorsement on the top, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and to have a word which you cannot understand or pronounce. Interregnum is an intermission or an interval in a span where a normal government is overthrown and a usurpation occurs. These 40 years, and to highlight Hyder and Tipu, the Maharaja was shown in a very, very poor light. I'm sure some of you remember he was shown like this obese retard who was dancing with the court dancer. Aao nartaki, main tumhe dikhata hu kaise nachna hai, and all that. And then you had the Maharani, the very sagacious Maharani Lakshmi Ammanni, shown like this, vamp from one of those Ekta Kapoor serials, constantly conniving, conspiring against Tipu. And if you remember, there was also a fire that broke out in the premier studios in Bangalore, and Sanjay Khan's face got burnt because of that. He had to have some plastic surgery to come back and act. And a lot of Kannada media and people in the media love to, bring out very juicy stories and So the normal things that came out was this was the curse of the Vodayar, and for showing him in that poor light, he actually got his face burnt. So as a young boy who otherwise hated history, I don't know what happened to me there. I was observing and imbibing all of these things. My family had nothing to do with Mysore. I'm half a Tamilian, half a Maharashtrian, but on a quest of self-discovery, completely self-initiated, self-motivated, and more importantly, self-funded for an otherwise, lower middle-class family which was just trying to eke out its livelihood. This Mysore bug that bit me at that time, I don't know what destiny has in store for you at times. After that, every vacation meant going to Mysore. As a 13-year-old boy trying to rummage the archives, meet members of the royal family, archivists, some old-timers, never with the intention to write a book or become a historian or anything. It was just, as they say, swanta sukhaya, for your own pleasure and I think the joy of discovery that research brings. And I was putting this all together in the form of a log book or so for private use. And this madness then actually expanded to 10 long years, where from that one king and queen, the interest expanded to the entire dynasty of 600 years. They were one of the longest reigning royal houses of India. And as Ambassador Mukherjee said, the south of India is a black hole for most people, especially in the north. And I was aghast to know that there was not a single book written in the modern times which covered this entire span of 600 years. The Vadiyars laid the foundation of what modern Karnataka is today. If Karnataka is a progressive, cosmopolitan, cultural osmosis that it had, many first to its credit, industrial revolution, it was thanks to them. And it is a shame that we did not have a book written on them. And Toni Morrison had said that if there is a book that you want to read and it hasn't been written yet, you must be the first one to write it. And so that is how very serendipitously this Splendors of Royal Mysore, the untold story of the Vodayars, my first book, came out in 2008. I was still juggling a corporate career then, and I thought this is a one book wonder and I'll go back to my very boring corporate job, calculating profit and loss of some American company and dying someday without not even anybody in the street knowing about it. But thankfully destiny had other plans. But even there, this 40-year period I think really fascinated me. Because that was the real, as you said, making and also the unmaking of India. Because after that, the collapse of India to British colonialism was steady. And so I really wanted to zoom in and write another book only on this father and son. But there too, lots of things happened. So I was 26 or 27 years of age when this first book came out, and lots of lectures I was giving about it. There was one talk in Bangalore, my hometown, where I was talking about this interregnum period on Hyder and Tipu. And I was actually, quoting letters written by Tipu himself. Go to Calicut, destroy so many temples, convert 4 lakh kafirs, and also gloating about all this as medallions that he wore, of achievement. And while I was doing that, I was just quoting him. And as Dr. Jaishankar said, he wrote so copiously, so you don't have any scope for ambiguity. You hear it straight from the devil's mouth. In such a scenario, a very civilized audience like this, suddenly a section of them broke out into protests, and I think to test Tipu's rocket technology, some of them made paper rockets and started throwing it at the podium, and the organizers got very harried. They were not as efficient as Ambassador Mukherjee's foot soldiers here, so they immediately aborted the lecture. I was ushered away to the green room. And my poor father was sitting in the first row, and some Tipu fan club or someone came to him and thrust a pamphlet in his hand and said, if you have an only son and if you want him to live long, please ask him to mind what he writes and speaks. And so obviously that we don't have any political ambitions, we don't know how these things work, so it caused quite a furore at home. And to my bad luck, a few weeks later, I had written some article on the divans of Mysore in which Tipu made some appearance. And for that, again, there was a furore. There was actually protesters gathered around the newspaper office in the heart of the Bangalore city, MG Road, asking for my apology. And I said, over my dead body, I'm not going to give an apology because what I have written is based on facts. And the editor of the newspaper actually told them that we'll give you double the space to counter him. But obviously these were not the kinds who wanted to indulge in any kind of intellectual counter. And so they had to do something, so they said, can we burn an effigy? So they actually went ahead and burnt one effigy. And the editor actually sent me a picture of that, and I actually, in those days, the only social media we all used was Orkut. So that was my Orkut profile for a long time. And I was thinking, okay, nazar utar gayi, so many people burning your effigy, all the bad eye is gone. But my mother didn't take it too lightly, because she kept very poor health. And as I said, this was new territory for all of us. We thought historiography is exposing the truth. We didn't know the landmines, the sharks that exist there. And so she kept such poor health, and she said, if you want me to live long, please, you make a promise to me that you will never talk about Tipu Sultan in public ever again. And I actually kept my promise to her, and till she was alive. I sadly lost her in 2018. And after that, I thought the promise made to a person is infructuous when the person herself is not there. With the hope that from whichever heaven she is in now, she'll be blessing me against any unintended bigotry or consequence or any paper rockets or anything else that comes my way. So I think there was a lot of suppressed emotions. दिल की भड़ास निकालनी थी, of 15 years of being told not to talk about him, not to write about him, and I would blame that for these 900 pages of an outpouring of 15 years of suppression.
And over 900 pages and 300,000 words plus. Well, here I would like to bring in Pavan sir. You have critiqued the selective reading of history. And Vikram's book dispels a lot of myths created by Nehruvian historians, especially on a very deeply polarizing character like Tipu. What is your view on historians today laying bare uncomfortable truths that were long hidden or even distorted, as some say?
Thank you. My dear friend Jay, if I may still call him that in spite of his exalted status, made an excellent speech and left, after which Bhaswati made an excellent speech and sat down, after which Vikram made an important speech. So I don't see much of a debate going on here. However, I will attempt to answer your question as honestly as I can. I wrote a book earlier called The Great Hindu Civilization, for which I received a great deal of flack from the left and the right, which convinced me that I must be doing something right. I got that flack from the left because, contrary to Vikram's belief, I fully agree with him that you cannot gloss over the facts of history when you write history truthfully and objectively. I wrote what I thought was right because I felt that many left liberal historians tend to underplay and undermine the tremendous foundational contribution of 5,000 years of our history, because they conflate it wrongly with a rightist attempt to over-glorify the Hindu past, which essentially means that if you praise that Hindu past or judge it on merits for its many, many achievements, you have become what is called a Sanghi. I thought such an approach is wrong. Similarly, in that book, when I spoke of the impact of the Turkic invasion on the great Hindu civilization as it had evolved for 5,000 years, I felt that it was a dishonesty to try and gloss over the degree of genuine destruction, proselytization, and pillage that took place. In fact, I quote in that book that Will Durant called it one of the bloodiest chapters in world history. And I believe, and I wrote which is why again I got flack from some of the what now today Tota in her reincarnated avatar calls the Marxist school, of which she was otherwise a strong proponent. Therefore, to put the truth in perspective, I said that this is wrong and that we must acknowledge history in order to transcend its acrimonies. And if we try to gloss over them, it creates a backlash, which indeed the well-intentioned intentioned attempt perhaps of some of the historians at that time, which seemed to make out as though the invaders had arrived in a tourist bus, offered some biryani to those who had conquered, and in return got some puri halwa, and a Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb evolved, was a travesty of history. A Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb indeed involved in spite of the destruction of that invasion. And that is a tribute to our soil and to the greatness of this land, which is what makes us unique in this world. I say this in the preface to come to Vikram's remarkable book. Let me say to you that I am an unabashed admirer of Vikram Sampath's historical scholarship. When I read in some detail, in fact more than once, his 2-volume biography of Savarkar, in fact I quote that in the Great Hindu Civilization. And what I found remarkable is that in spite perhaps of his own beliefs, his assessment of the man, unlike some of his uninformed, illiterate and ignorant supporters, is one of extreme historical balance. I quote to you, in order to say what I need to do about Tipu. About Savarkar he says, as the intellectual fountainhead of the ideology of Hindutva, Savarkar is undoubtedly one of the most contentious political thinkers and leaders of the 20th century. Accounts of his long and stormy life have oscillated from glorifying hagiographies to reproachful demonization. And this is the key line written by this young man. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. And so my own view is that for those equally ignorant, uninformed and illiterate who condemn Savarkar, in my view, he was a remarkable freedom fighter. One of the most courageous men who suffered perhaps the most out of a courage of conviction for the freedom of India. And I admire him for that. And I admire him not so much for some of the reasons which people who haven't read him admire him, which is his short tract on Hindutva, and which he, by the way, wrote in Ratnagiri jail. I'm still going to come to Tipu, because everybody has spoken, so give me 3 minutes more. And because you have to give a context to this remarkable book. Savarkar wrote that tract in Ratnagiri jail after close to 12 years of Kala Pani, of which more than half was spent in solitary confinement. And he wrote that tract while he was still in house imprisonment in Ratnagiri. And he wrote that tract at a time when, in my view, Gandhiji, perhaps for well-intentioned reasons, but which I believe were misplaced, was supporting the Khilafat movement. The Congress was trying to underplay the massacre of the Moplas in Malabar. And there were already voices from the Muslim League asking for a division of India on the lines of faith. It was in that context that he wrote that 3 or 4 page tract, which he later, in many of his writings, diluted. I admire Savarkar much more for his forward and progressive thinking. I think there are only 2 men of the freedom movement, Mahatma Gandhi and Savarkar, who spoke so courageously about the need for reform within Hinduism. He called them the 7 fetters, Sat Bediya, Beti Bandi, Vyavasai Bandi, Sparsh Bandi, Roti Bandi, none of which is given importance to today. But a short 4 lines are. Therefore, why I am saying this as a preface is, a historian like Vikram sets things in perspective. And let me say to you, where Tipu Sultan is concerned, while a contentious figure, I have no doubt, irrespective of comparisons, every person, my first book was a biography of Mirza Ghalib. You cannot judge him in every respect by the standards that prevail today. And you cannot judge many Hindu texts of great importance, including Tulsidasa's Ramcharitmanas, by the standards that sometimes prevail today. You are a context of your times. Tipu Sultan, in my view, was a courageous opponent of British rule, for which the British feared him. At the same time, it is equally true that where matters of faith were concerned, he was definitely, in many ways, a bigot. In many ways, some of the highest ministers in his court were Hindus, or at least advisors in some form, and that the massacres that he inflicted in Malabar, in Coorg, in Mangalore, in Calicut, in large other parts of Kerala were unforgivable, and therefore he again, and here again I quote Vikram, because he says about, after writing this remarkable book and with the knowledge of someone living in Bangalore, he writes in his own book, Tipu emerges for me as a complex character and a historian's enigma, one who defies easy compartmentalization, while then writing critically about some of his completely unwarranted massacres on the basis of faith. He says, at the same time, erasing some redeeming features of his character and life is also being disingenuous with history. That's a historian's balance. Not the ignorant. I'm sorry I'm using that too often. Perhaps it's far too applicable nowadays. That is his riposte to those, by the way, whom he's critical of, who see history in black and white polarities, either absolutely good or absolutely bad. And historical characters are not that. And Tipu also must be judged in that light. Ultimately, you must understand, Tipu, the Nizam, the Marathas, if Tipu collaborated with the French, there were enough people in the Marathas, including some whose survivors are important today, even in the current government, who collaborated openly with the British. So let us not pass hasty judgments. And it's a record of history. Therefore, those were troubled times. And ultimately, the real puppeteers were the British. Their legacy is still being contested by those whom they used, and creating divisions in our society when they used Tipu, they used the Marathas, they used the Nizam, they used the Peshwas, and used them all ultimately to prevail themselves over a series of warring factions, each of whom at some point or the other was their ally. After all, Tipu called Lord Cornwallis his best friend, even though he had a tiger that was found in his palace, which is still in the museum, which you describe in some gruesome detail. So, the short point I want to make is, and I say short because I got an opportunity to speak last after two distinguished people gave speeches and sat down, is that I admire Vikram's historical objectivity. And I think this book should be read from that perspective rather than to be read from the point of view of oscillating between eulogization and demonization. Thank you so much.
Vikram, we've heard of the diplomacy of, every ruler is judged or assessed on several things. We had Dr. Jaishankar talk about the diplomacy of Tipu. We just heard Bhaswati ma'am and Pavan sir on two aspects. One, that of the social report card that he had. And the fact that, but there is also the aspect of his military policies. And I think that is something I would like you to also touch upon. But before that, I wanted to ask you, because your books usually also capture a lot of emotional, turmoil which is happening. And in this case, especially with 1/3 of the book dedicated to his father and the father-son relationship, it was not a very cordial relationship. Why don't you start by telling us about this aspect, the personal relationship aspect of the father and the son, and then move on to the...
Sure. In the writing and the research of the book, I think Hyder Ali, to me, the father, comes across as a much more wiser, a statesman, realpolitik, well-defined, Machiavellian who would put all our current day politicians to shame, perhaps, and running with the hare, hunting with the hounds. He was a man who, as a boy of 4, he loses his father, and his father owed money to someone, some debtors, who come to collect that money back, and they plunder the house. They put Haider, who's 4 years old, and his elder brother Shahbaz, who's 8 years old, into a nagada, a kettle drum, and they're beaten on, and these boys faint. And in that very pitiable condition, their mother Majida Begum runs away to Srirangapatna, the capital of the Maharaja of Mysore, and pleads with him for mercy for her fatherless sons. And the Maharaja then takes pity on them and pays off the debtors, and also makes a promise that when these boys, fatherless boys, come of age, they will be taken into the Mysorean army. And he keeps his word. Little did he know what was coming his way. 1749 is when Hyder makes his foray into the Mysorean polity with the siege of Devanhalli, near the Bangalore airport today. And between that, just 11 years, in 11 years' time, this man, through all his machinations, manages to overthrow the throne of his own benefactor and take over as the Sarvadhikari, or the chief dictator of the kingdom. So you can imagine, not only did he manipulate the circumstances, and also the very troubled times that the 18th century India, and particularly southern India, was, with the Carnatic wars, the wars of succession in Arcot, in Hyderabad, to the Nizam's throne. If the only person who made the maximum hay while the sun shone was Hyder. So as you said, he got the kingdom on a platter, but this kingdom that the son gets, and Hyder was actually illiterate because of his troubled childhood. The only literary achievement of his life was to learn to sign the first alphabet of his name, which was her. But Tipu, on the other hand, was extremely well versed in Persian, Arabic, wrote copiously. So, literacy and knowledge cannot actually, count for strategy and diplomacy. I think he is a very shining example of that. So you get the kingdom on a platter, but then your hubris, your arrogance, your own megalomania, your self-bloated image that you can do no wrong, how that can actually lead to your downfall. What all the father builds, this man literally squanders it away in just about 17 years that he ruled. And as Ambassador Mukherjee mentioned about the book about autocrats, I think we were having that discussion that most autocrats had a very difficult childhood, especially father wounds. So I think it's a lot to do with psychology also. Fathers, perhaps, who are very strict, as was the case with Hyder. There are numerous instances, I quote, where once right in the middle of the battle with the Marathas, called the Battle of Chinkurli, Hyder is so incensed with Tipu's intemperance, he takes a cane and literally whacks him hard in front of everybody. And he's a young man of 20, 21. Imagine what it could have done to his, mental makeup. He throws a tantrum, he dashes his sword and his turban and says, to hell with you and your war, I'm not going to fight with you anymore. And after, Tipu's death, in his palace room, the British discover a very curious agreement that Tipu signed to his father. It had 8 articles which said, I will not steal money. If I steal, then I can be flogged. If, I will not lie to anyone. I will not make idle talk. From petty crimes to also insurrection against the Sarkar, which the father thought his son was capable of. There were a series of punishments. And he said at the last line, I am signing all this pure hosho hawaz mein main likh raha hu ye, and with a signature and a royal emblem. So it clearly showed that the father and son really had a very, tense dynamic. And all the time, there are so many references which he says, what all I have built, this man, due to his foolishness, he will squander it away. And it was perversely true in his case. And Hyder, because he had usurped the kingdom from a Hindu Maharaja who was his benefactor, a largely Hindu majority population, he was clear that his ends was only power. He didn't care about the faith and so on. Outside Mysore, there were conversions, but within Mysore, he let people do whatever they pleased, as long as he had the power. And even then, the Dutch accounts mention that he banned cow slaughter, bull slaughter, etc. in Mysore. But Tipu, even as a young boy, he used to go on a hunting spree and kill these cows and oxen, for which his father puts him into solitary confinement, quite like what Savarkar faced, where no one could actually talk to him for several days. And those seeds of bigotry, I think, were sown in his mind as a young boy. Now, Hyder did not know to read and write, so he puts the Maulvi in charge of the education. He doesn't know what is going on. After 2-3 years, there's a mock examination where he says, Batao, let's see what all you have learned. And he's aghast at what the son has learned. And he loses his temper, he dismisses the Maulvi and says, what kind of nonsense and religious bigotry have you put in my son's head? If he learns only this, he will grow up to become a good mullah, but he will not become a great ruler. And so I think those early days of germination of ideas, which were very, very much rooted in religious theology, that was something that happened in his childhood. And even someone like William Kirkpatrick, who translated these letters, he says those children who get a lot of corporal punishments from their fathers particularly, I think they grow up to become, they can't brook the smallest of dissent. For every mistake, it is blown out of proportion, and they, I think, redeem this by punishing others. So I think
don't you think it's too generalized a theory?
I'm not a psychologist, but I did consult a psychoanalyst because Tipu's dreams also. I mean, a lot is said. I don't know what is the reference to, which is whose father is being referred to. I have no clue. My father has been a good one. Though he gets these threat letters on my behalf. But, even from that age itself, when you're growing up to this, and in Tipu's case, he also had a very strong-headed mother. Hyder, who was so brave with the British, apparently he had a mortal fear for his wife, and so he would rush to her chambers with trepidation, and she was very good at tongue lashing and so on, and he would get such a earful, and he would come out running quickly, and he then used to sit with his male buddies and drink and body jokes and lewd remarks, and he would say, I can face the British sword but not my wife's tongue. And so I think a dominating mother who also controlled who her son will marry. So Hyder had a choice for Tipu to marry, but she prevailed and said, you marry some other girl. Of course, Tipu married both, but the first. So I think in such a scenario, if you actually psychoanalyze the parents and what happened. I think that gives a hint into why he becomes this very, very atrocious and barbaric ruler when he grows up.
What I wanted to understand from this entire discussion so far that we've had is that should we continue to call, and I think this is going to be a general question in everybody's mind, that should we continue to call him the Tiger of Mysore or not?
So I think, there is no doubt, as all the other eminent speakers have mentioned, that he was a brave soldier and he had this visceral hatred for the British, which is a known fact. But a big but there is that he was taking the help of the French to actually counter the British. And the French were no less imperialist or colonial in their ambitions, as was witnessed in the Carnatic Wars, as the British. So by some stroke of luck, if Tipu had won, probably we would be having this discussion today in French. India would have become a French colony. Mysore certainly would have become a French colony. So at a time, and the people who actually, the same Marxist historians and others of that worldview, for whom nationalism is a bad word, and they say that there was nothing called India, till the time the British came, then what India and what nation and what freedom fighter was he? So you can't have it both ways. You can't say there was no nation, but he was fighting for that nation. So I think that is one problem, where here he was, of course, enlisting the support of the French, playing to the Anglo-French rivalries, which those that were happening in Europe played out in peninsular India and other parts of India. That was one aspect. But the other more disturbing aspect is that he solicited, as I think was mentioned earlier, faith-based support to the larger Ummah or the Muslim Brotherhood right from the beginning. Now his father knew that they were illegitimate rulers. They needed legitimacy for their survival, and Hyder always had that inferiority. So did his son. So they sent a lot of emissaries to the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam here with presents and so on, saying, I am the actual ruler, the true Muslim ruler, and so I should be called the Badshah. But Shah Alam himself is so powerless and weak that he can't confer any titles on anyone. And then he sends emissaries all the way to the Ottoman Caliph to actually grant him this legitimacy to rule. And this is something, interestingly, what the Delhi Sultans did, whether it was the Khiljis, the Lodhis or the Tughlaqs. To rule India, they took permission from the Caliph. It was only the Mughals who dispensed with that. So Tipu does the same thing. And it is after that legitimacy comes from the Caliph that he calls himself Sultan Badshah, and then he makes this huge octagonal, throne of gold with this, a very beautiful umbrella with the Huma bird and beautiful pearls and rubies and all that. The sad part is he never got to sit on it, because by the time the throne was completed, he was killed. This legitimacy that he sought from others, so for that, talking to people as, including the Shah of Persia, to the Turkey Sultan, the Caliph, and 2 years before his death to the Afghan ruler, Zaman Shah, Durrani ruler, where there is a very, very clear plan. There is no ambiguity. He writes to him saying, please invade India, and faith-based again. For the first year, let's together flush out the whole of North India from the Kafirs. Everywhere there is this mention of the believer, the true faith, and all of that. And the second year, let us flush out the south of India from the Kafirs, meaning here perhaps the Marathas, the Rajputs, the Jats, and so many others, and the British and the French, who also, British at least, not the French whom he was allying with. And at the end of the 2 years, let us meet midway and divide this whole subcontinent among ourselves and call it an Islamic caliphate. Now, many people, I've been in, media interviews, they say, but Subhash Chandra Bose also asked the Germans' support. But I don't think at all that he was looking to make this a German colony. So here you had very clear ambitions of either French colonialism or an Islamic caliphate. So had he by some stroke of destiny won, I think the color and texture of India today would have been completely different.
One last question before I open it up for questions from the audience, and this is to all the panelists here. So far, the character of Tipu has come across as very complex, mostly negative. But can you think of one?
I think it would do a lot of injustice, Lipika, if I didn't very briefly also talk about, history is also a discipline and a space which calls for healing.
True.
So, their stories, the subaltern shall speak. Their stories have been airbrushed for centuries. And I think this is a moment to acknowledge at least all those souls who underwent the tortures. And quickly I shall recount them before you, pose your question. In the process of, this invasion and so on, the kind of tortures heaped on communities which to this day have that intergenerational trauma and memories, I think that is what makes his legacy so troubled. You have the Mandyam Iyengars in Mysore. 700 men, women and children of that community brutally massacred on the day of Naraka Chaturdashi, one day before Dipavali. Again by subterfuge, they are called to have a feast in a Lakshmi Narasimha temple in Srirangapatna, and while they are in the midst of this, children too, quite like what General Dyer did in Jallianwala Bagh, you have the doors closed and elephants are let loose and they're all trampled to death. I don't know if we'll start celebrating General Dyer Jayanti also somewhere in India sometime. I hope not. And that memory of that lies with the community even now, where after 250 years, that community does not celebrate Diwali like when the rest of us do in India. That day is observed as a day of Shraddh and mourning, and only 1 week later or something, they celebrate their Diwali. The Christians of Mangalore, almost upwards of 60,000, 80,000 Kannada Christians dragged all the way tied to elephants from Mangalore to Srirangapatna, around 300 kilometers, pregnant women being asked to march, many of them delivering babies on the way. There's no proper thing for funerals, the corpses being consumed by jackals and dogs, and these are all in gruesome details documented by several records of the Archdiocese of Mangalore. There's a Barkur manuscript in Kannada which also talks about this. 27 churches in Mangalore, including the Milagres Church, which was reconstructed later. All of these were the legacy of this man. And so when the Tipu Jayanti thing happened by the Congress government, the BJP obviously had to protest and come against it. But you had a lot of social groups. The Christians of Mangalore obviously did not have anything to do with the BJP's politics. They came out and said, how can you commemorate someone whose antecedents are something that we live with that wound even to this day? Similarly, the Nayars of Malabar, untold miseries, the gruesome details that it was very tough thinking about it, writing about it, researching about it, and I'm sure it will be as tough for you to read about it. Calicut, where babies were killed in front of their mothers and hung to the mothers' necks and then hung from the trees. Now, many people might argue this was a pre-modern time and kingship is intrinsically linked with violence. I agree, completely agree. But some people are more violent than their contemporaries, and when this violence is inspired by religious theology, I think that becomes the problem. And you have the United Nations Convention, which defines what is a genocide in that in 1948. It says even the intent to harm someone on the basis of their identity, their race, their color, their sex or religion is termed as genocide. So similarly, you have the Kodavas in Coorg. Every year on the 12th of December, they commemorate it as Martyrs' Day. So where again on this near Bhagamandala there is this Devati Param, one hillock, where again by subterfuge, the Kodavas are these military class who resisted him all through, just like the Nayars. And these people are tricked into a negotiation. They all come unarmed and then they are hacked, literally stabbed in the back, and again thousands and thousands of them killed. There's this Nettrekere in Mangalore which gets its name because of the red color of the blood that started flowing there. And the Kodavas, they have visceral hatred for Tipu. Even in Kerala, a lot of sorry to say, but dogs are addressed by that name because of the hatred that they have for him. So I think this apple cart that gets upset in society when to appease communities or to whitewash and airbrush. History, as I said, offers that space to heal. Nothing can be done. The perpetrator, the victim, both are dead and gone. That responsibility does not lie on any community of today, which I preface again and again. But at the same time, communities of today should not valorize and hyphenate themselves with such barbaric people. And to appease yourself, to make that palatable to today's communities, and worse, for political reasons, to deny that. Forget justice, forget healing. The insult that is, the injury that is added to the insult is to say these things never happened. This is all exaggeration. I think that does a lot of disservice. And I think this is an occasion when you at least say that these things happened. I'm sure those souls which are so troubled for 200 years, somewhere they'd get their closure and probably say, okay, that's all I wanted, that at least people know our story.
Since I've been continuously asked to keep an eye on the watch and we have to wrap up, so we have just about enough time for, say, 2 questions that we'll take from the audience. Do we have an additional mic somewhere to hand out?
Maybe the young people in
Yes,
the audience.
I think the young people would be, yeah. Why don't we hand the mic out there?
We can take 3,
Yeah.
1, 2, and 3.
Okay, yeah.
Good evening, sir.
Started late.
Sir, in navigating, in exploring the history of Tipu Sultan, how do you navigate the tension between him being a progressive ruler that we have been studying in history, for say his state building activities and his military innovations, and on the other hand, his controversial aspects of his reign, which would be treatment of his treatment to certain communities. So how do you navigate the tension between the two? And how do we view such historical leaders, not just Tipu Sultan, but the others in today's world and age? Like, how do we, as a student, we would either characterize a person as negative or positive. So how do we navigate, like, how do we characterize them? Thank you, sir.
Sure.
2 more questions, and then I'll ask Vikram to take all of them together.
Good evening. Thank you for this wonderful book.
Yes.
Should I stand up?
No, that's fine.
Oh, it's
please.
okay. No, I think it's, you rightly said we should not airbrush history. We have to learn from history. I mean, Tipu has betrayed his own benefactor. Bangladesh, we gave them the independence and the country, and they are killing Hindus. So when will we Hindus ever learn to do the right thing?
I
The
wish I
last
knew
question.
an answer to that. I think that's the
Last
conundrum we
question
are all
maybe
facing.
from that corner.
Good evening, Dr. Sampath.
Yes.
How do we as readers of history then start to form the dialogue that you as the historian do between the facts, the narrative and whatnot? And how do we differentiate between what is political action driven by the want for expansionism and the institution of power versus violence enacted for religious bigotry and those reasons? Or is it just a Venn diagram?
Okay. So the first one was, I think the first and the third are almost, allied as to how do we negotiate the contradictions of the good and bad, the religious bigotry. So as I said earlier, I think that a lot of people argue that these were pre-modern times, and violence and kingship were intrinsically linked, and all kings were violent. But in Tipu's case, you see very clearly his own manifesto says that, which he declared in 1786, that the goal of my Sarkare Khudadad, the Islamization of a Hindu kingdom like Mysore, becomes Sarkare Khudadad. Kannada and Marathi, which were the court language, is replaced by Persian. Places names, Mysore becomes Nazarabad, Coorg becomes Zafarabad, Mangalore becomes Islamabad. All these names, which luckily no one knows that they were names at some point of time at all. So it was very clearly in his manifesto, he says the goal of my Sarkare Khudadad is to annihilate the infidels. So everywhere the thrust being on religion, the true faith, including the so-called sword of Tipu Sultan on which the serial was made. There is an inscription which says the sabre of the victorious sword, which is to drench itself in the blood of the Kafirs and to establish the true religion. So when that is the case, and as I said, his own letters, his own dream registers, I got them psychoanalyzed because dreams are the index of the subconscious mind. What are you thinking all the time? So I took those dreams. So every day he used to dream vividly, apparently, and every morning spend 2 hours in the toilet, writing these dreams out in the dream registers. And the original, actually, I got in the British Library in London in his own hand, in Persian. And so
quite
if you
versatile in the toilet writing.
Yes, I felt a little... When I actually had to touch it, I said, okay, this has been written in very difficult circumstances, so I don't want to. But then if you actually translate and read, of course, Girish Karnad has made a Dreams of Tipu Sultan, which is something totally opposite to what the original dreams are. They're full of violence. Suddenly Prophet Muhammad or an angel appears and says, go so far, destroy this church, destroy this temple, kill them. So the psychoanalyst actually told me that this is a man who's consumed by hatred. It's also almost like self-combustion. You know, you're so full of hatred, so full of toxicity that you self-combust. So when his own letters are there, when his own letters he writes and gloats as medallions of honor, saying that these are the crimes I have committed. When crimes are considered as virtues, what is the scope for ambiguity? And then to, of course, everybody, I mean, Hitler also loved his daughter, you know, he was a vegetarian. You can go on, you can look at good and bad in every human being, but Hitler would be finely known for what he did, the horrendous Holocaust of the Jews. So there are redeeming features of his character, the rockets of Mysore, which he brought about, the agricultural produce was increased, you know, non-interest-free loans given to farmers. Roads also, they were built in Kerala so that his cannons and his horses and elephants could go. And they were just built so much as to let these you know, heavy artillery go there, and most of them fell into disrepair after that. So they are even called that Tipu Road or something there in Kerala. So this being the case, I would err on the side, you know, where very, very controversial legacy, but when you use that in today's politics, I think that becomes the problem. Just to valorize someone because of someone's faith and for contemporary politics, I think that is a very, very problematic issue in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sure there are many more questions which I think Vikram can take after the event gets over. I would request now Ms. Dipali Bhasin to come on the stage for the vote of thanks, please. Thank you.
As this memorable Kitaab evening draws to a close, I, Dipali Bhasin, Ehsaas Woman of Delhi, extend my heartfelt gratitude to each one of you for making this book launch such a resounding success. First and foremost, a big thank you to our esteemed chief guest who had to leave early, Honourable Minister of External Affairs, Jaishankar ji, for his presence and words today. My gratitude goes to Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee for chairing the session so well, and a special guest today, Shri Pavan K. Varma ji, for your insights. Dr. Vikram Sampath for giving us his profound and meticulously researched work on Tipu Sultan. I thank Ms. Lipika Bhushan for her diligently curated questions. And the audience, thank you for your curiosity, your questions, and your engagement. It is your love for literature and history that makes events like these so rewarding. A special note of appreciation to India Habitat Center, who has worked tirelessly to ensure the success of this event. Your meticulous attention to detail made everything seamless and enjoyable. Let us carry the spirit of inquiry and discussion that this evening has ignited. Thank you and have a wonderful night. Do feel free to pick a copy personally autographed by the author before you leave. Thank you.